Hello, children. All right, we are continuing. Hopefully, we get a couple people in today. Jerry, I know I'm expecting you. Hopefully, Giselle, you got my link and you're going to jump in today. So, we are continuing Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Today, we are on chapter 5. So, just a quick recap for those of you that are just jumping in. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, so far, we know that there have been attacks by an unidentified creature on different ships throughout the Atlantic and the Pacific. So they're saying that they nailed it down where it cannot be a reef, it cannot be any kind of like rock structure or anything like that, because it's the same sort of damage done to all these ships. And one in particular was a very reputable ship that like the company was known for being very on time and very reliable. So the last chapter we were just introduced to Ned Land, who is the harpooner. The main characters so far are Dr. Pierre Aronneau, who's a scientist that specializes in whales. There is Ned Land, who is a harpooner, and Captain Farragut, who is obviously the captain of the ship. So let's go ahead and get started with Chapter 5 at random. For a while, the Abraham Lincoln's voyage was uneventful. Abraham Lincoln is the ship, by the way. But one circumstance arose that displayed Ned Land's marvelous skill and showed just how much confidence we could have in it. Off the Falkland Islands on June 30th, the frigate came in and in contact with American whalers, and we learned that they hadn't any knowledge of the narwhal. But one of them, captain of the Monroe, knew Ned Land had shipped before on the Abraham Lincoln and asked his help in hunting a baleen whale that was in sight. Eager to see Ned Land at work, Commander Farragut, Commander, not Captain, allowed him to make his way aboard the Monroe. And the Canadian had such good luck with his right and left shot, he harpooned not one whale, but two, striking the first through the heart and catching the other after a chase lasting just a few minutes. No doubt about it, if the monster was ever to deal with Ned Land's harpoon, I would not put any money on the monster. Our frigate sailed down the east coast of South America with prodigious speed. By July 3rd, we were at the entrance of the Strait of Magellan off Cabo de las Virgenes. But Commander Farragut didn't want to interrupt the winding passageway and maneuvered to double Cape Horn. The whole crew agreed with him. In all honesty, we were likely to run into the narwhal in such a cramped strait. Many of the sailors swore that the monster couldn't negotiate the passageway simply because he was too big for it. Near 3 o'clock in the afternoon on July 6th, 15 miles south of the shore, the Abraham Lincoln doubled the solitary islet off the tip of the South American continent, and that stray Dutch seamen called the Cape Horn after their hometown of Hoorn. We set the course northwest, and the next day the frigate's propeller was finally churning in the waters of the Pacific. Hello, Miss Gawar. Open your eyes, the Abraham Lincoln sailors kept saying, and they opened amazingly wide. Eyes and spyglasses, a bit dazzled, it's true, by the outlook of $2,000, didn't remain at rest for a second. Day and night, we scanned the surface of the ocean, and those narcoleptic eyes, whose ability to see in the dark increased their chances by 50%, had an excellent shot at winning the prize. For me personally, the money wasn't any allure, yet I had hardly been the least watchful on board. Grabbing only a few minutes for meals and a few hours for sleep, come rain or come shine, I stayed put on deck. Sometimes bending over the forecastle railings, sometimes leaning against the stern rail, I eagerly scoured the cotton-colored wake widening in the ocean as far as the eye could see. And how many times I shared the excitement of the staff and crew when some unpredictable whale would lift its blackish back above the waves. In a second, the frigate's deck would become so densely populated, the cowls over the companionways would spew out a torrent of sailors, the officers. With panting chests and anxious eyes, we would watch the cetacean's movements. I looked so hard I nearly went blind from the run-down retina, while Conseil, as stoic as ever, kept repeating to me in a calm tone, "If Master's eyes would kindly stop bulging, Master will see further." But what a waste of energy! The Abraham Lincoln would change course and race after the animals we'd sighted, only to find an ordinary right whale, or a common sperm whale, that soon vanished in the midst of our extensive cursing. When the good weather held up, but our voyage was proceeding under optimum conditions. By then, it was bad season in the southernmost regions because July in this zone corresponds to our January in Europe. But the sea stayed smooth, and offered an unobstructed view over a wide perimeter. Ned Land continued to display the most stubborn skepticism. Outside his spells on watch, he even kept up a pretense of never looking at the surface of the waves, at least while no whales were in sight. And yet the marvelous power of his vision would have performed a real service. But the obstinate Canadian spent 8 hours out of every 12 reading or sleeping in his cabin. 100 times I scolded him for his lack of interest. Phooey, he replied. Nothing's out there, Professor Aronow. Even if there was some animal, what chance would we have of spotting it? Can't you see we're just wandering around at random? Folks say they've sighted the slippery beast again in the Pacific high seas. I'm truly willing to believe it, but 2 months have already gone by since then, and judging from your narwhal's personality, it hates getting moldy from hanging out too long in the same waterways. It's blessed with a terrific gift for getting around. Now then, Professor, you know better than I that nature doesn't do senseless things, and she wouldn't give some naturally slow animal the talent to move quickly if it didn't need to. So, if the beast exists, it's already long gone. I had no reply for this. Obviously, we were groping in the dark. But what else could we do? All the same, our chances were automatically pretty limited. Yet everybody still felt confident of success, and not a single sailor on board would have bet against the narwhal appearing, and soon. On July 20th, we cut the Tropic of Capricorn at longitude 105 degrees, and the 27th of the same month, we crossed the equator by the 110th meridian. These bearings determined, the frigate took a more decisive westward heading and tackled the seas towards the Central Pacific. With good reason, Commander Farragut felt as though it would be better to stay in deep waters and keep his distance from continents and islands, whose neighborhoods the animals seemed to avoid. No doubt, our boatswain said, because there isn't enough water for it. So the frigate kept well out when going past the Tuamotu, the Marquesas, the Hawaiian Islands, and then cut across the Tropic of Cancer at longitude 132 degrees and headed towards the seas of China. We were finally in the area of the monster's latest antics. In all honesty, life became impossible on board. Hearts were beating so frightfully, they risked developing aneurysms. The whole crew suffered from the nervous excitement that is beyond for me to describe. Nobody ate, nobody slept. 20 times a day, some error in perception or some optical illusion of some sailor perched upon the cross trees would cause unbearable anguish. And with this emotion repeated 25 times over, we stayed in a state of irritability so intense that a reaction was bound to follow. And in fact, the reaction wasn't long in coming. For 3 months, during which every day felt like a century, the Abraham Lincoln plowed through the northerly seas of the Pacific, racing after whales we'd sighted, suddenly veering off course, swerving off sharply from one tack to another, stopping abruptly, putting on steam and reversing engines in quick succession, at the risk of stripping the gears, and not leaving a single sector unexplored from the beaches of Japan to the coasts of America. And we found nothing. Nothing except vast, deserted waters. Nothing remotely like a gigantic narwhal, or an underwater islet, or a derelict ship, or a runaway reef, or anything else in the least uncanny. So a reaction set in. At first, discouragement took hold of the people's minds, opening the door to skepticism. A new feeling appeared on board, 3 parts shame and 7 parts fury. The crew called themselves out-and-out fools for being hoodwinked by a phantom, and then they got even angrier. Those mountains of arguments built up over a year collapsed all at once. After that, people only wanted to catch up with their eating and sleeping to make up for all the time they had so stupidly sacrificed. With typical human fickleness, they jumped from one extreme to the other. The undertaking's hardiest supporters inevitably turned to its noisiest opponents. The reaction surged upward from the bowels of the ship, from the stoker's quarters to the staff mess room. Even if it hadn't been for Commander Farragut's characteristic stubbornness, the frigate would definitely have been headed right back towards the Cape in the south. But this pointless search couldn't drag on much longer. The Abraham Lincoln had done everything it could to succeed and hadn't any reason to blame itself. Never had a crew of the American naval vessel shown more patience or zeal. They weren't responsible for the failure. There was nothing to do but go home. The crew presented the commander with a petition to that effect. The commander stood his ground. His sailors couldn't hide their discontent in their work and suffered because of it. I don't mean to imply that there was a mutiny on board, but after a reasonable period of intransigence, Commander Farragut, like Christopher Columbus before him, asked for a grace period of just 3 more days. If the monster hadn't appeared by the deadline of 3 days off, our helmsman would give the wheel 3 turns, and the Abraham Lincoln would chart a course for European seas. This promise was given on November 2nd. It had the immediate result of revving the crew's failing spirits. They scanned the ocean with renewed care. Every man wanted one last look for which to sum up his experience. Spyglasses went to work with feverish energy. We'd issued a crowning challenge to the giant narwhal. The latter had no acceptable excuse for ignoring the summons to appear. 2 days went by, and the Abraham Lincoln stayed at half steam. On the off chance that the animal would be found in these waterways, we used 1,000 methods to spark its interest or rouse it from apathy. We trailed along huge sides of bacon in our wake, much to the satisfaction, I must say, of assorted sharks. While the Abraham Lincoln heaved to, its longboats radiated out about it in all directions and didn't leave a corner of the sea unexplored. But on the evening of November 4th, arrived with its underwater mystery still unresolved. At noon the next day, November 5th, the promised deadline would come and go. As good as his word, Commander Farragut would fix his position, set course for the southeast, and leave the northerly regions of the Pacific decisively behind. By then, the frigate lay at latitude 31 north and longitude 136 east. The Japan coast was less than 200 miles to our leeward. Night was falling. 8 o'clock had just sounded. Huge clouds had covered the moon's disk, then in her first quarter. The sea was undulating placidly beneath the frigate's steam post. Just then, I was in the bow, leaning over the starboard rail. Conseil and I was stationed next to me and looking straight ahead. The crew were perched in the shrouds of examining the horizon, which was gradually shrinking and darkening. Officers had scoured the gathering gloom in their night glasses. Sometimes in the murky ocean sparkled underneath the moonbeams and darted between the fringes of two clouds. Then all traces of light vanished into darkness. I looked to Conseil and saw the gallant lad showed signs of falling under the popular influence. At least I thought so. Maybe his nerves were twitching with curiosity for the first time in history. Come on, Conseil, I told him. This is your last chance to pocket that $2,000. If master will allow me to say so, Conseil replied. I never expected to win that prize, and the Union government could have promised me 10,000 and been none the poorer. You're right, Conseil. It turned out to be foolish business after all, and we jumped into it too hastily. What a waste of time, what a pointless outlay of energy. 6 months ago, we would have already been back in France. In master's little apartment, Conseil remarked. In master's museum. And by now, I would have classified master's fossils, and master's Barbarossa would be ensconced in its cage in the natural gardens, and it would have attracted every curiosity seeker in town. No question, Conseil, and I imagine they will have some fun with us as well. To be sure, Conseil replied serenely. I do think they'll have fun at master's expense, and it must be said. It must be said, Conseil. Well, then it will serve the master right. How true. When one has the honor of being an expert, the master is, one mustn't lay himself open to. Conseil was not able to finish his compliment. In the midst of the overall silence, a voice rang out. It was Ned Land's voice, and it shouted, Ahoy, there's the thing we're after, abreast of us to leeward. All right, that's it. Next time, we actually get to meet the monster. Join me, it's going to be tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Everybody have a good day.